Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for ADramOfOutlander.com for all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Starz TV series and everything in between. This is episode 84, The Scottish Prisoner, week 16. Hello, hello, hello. We're getting there. We only have a handful of episodes left to get through this read-along. We're going to jump right into chapter 31, Betrayal. So it turns out Jamie had gone back to Argus House, and when John had returned, Hal storms up to him immediately and asks him where that bloody Scotchman is. Gray thought it was awfully fast for news to get back to Hal already. And behind him, he hears, "Here, your grace." Jamie was reading a book called Philosophical Inquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful. I'm thinking I need to be looking that book up and see what it's about. Jamie certainly likes his philosophy. What I have found is, in short, the beautiful is what is well-formed and aesthetically pleasing, whereas the sublime is what has the power to compel and destroy us. The preference for the sublime over the beautiful was to mark the transition from the neoclassical to the romantic. And Gray stopped for a second and was relieved that Jamie had finished the collected disputations of Marcus Tullius Cicero. Why, you ask? Well, because the philosophical book by Burke would make much less of a dent in Hal's skull if it came to blows. Oh boy. John is always looking out for his big brother. So Hal is in a storm. He is angry. He tells John and Jamie to get in there, and he's commanding them into the library after him. So Jamie sits down and looks at Hal quite deliberately and very coolly. And right when the door closed, Hal swings around to look at Jamie, livid with shock and fury. He was quite beside himself. He wants to know what Jamie has done. And in his physical description, his right hand is flexing, closing and unclosing. Well, Jamie has demonstrated this throughout the books, and John has demonstrated this, as have other characters. So I don't know if all men do this or men of that time frame did this frequently, but it's a way that Diana Gabaldon uses it as a marker for somebody trying to hold their temper, but they really want to punch something. So Hal is trying to talk, but he is flustered. He can't get the words out properly. And he finally tells Jamie, "We have done you the honor of including you in all our councils, and this is how you repay." Oh, okay, that was really not the place to go with Jamie now, was it? Because Hal stops abruptly because Jamie had gotten up to his feet quickly and stepped toward Hal. And Hal took a step back in pure reflex. And Jamie's face was red. "Honor. You dare speak to me of honor?" And his large fist crashes down on the table. All the ornaments rattle and the bud vase fell over. Remember when he was in Glastwig and being attacked by our dead man? Well, he also knocked things over. And he pretty much launches into Hal. "Be still. Ye seize a man who is your captive, and your captive by honour alone, sir. For believe me, if I had none, I should have been in France these 4 years past. Seize and compel him by threat to do your bidding, and by that bidding to betray ancient comrades, to forswear vows, betray friendship and loyalty, to become your very creature. And you think you'd do me honor to count me an Englishman? Whoa. Okay, so Jamie is great at verbal assault. He's an excellent communicator and orator. I think Hal's getting the picture here. And it's described as the air seeming to shiver with the force of his words. And nobody spoke. The only thing they could hear was the dripping of water from the fallen vase. And then John starts to ask, why then? Oh, John. And John views him as Fraser turns toward him, and he thinks him dangerous and beautiful as a red stag at bay. And John felt his heart seize in his chest. He is like a schoolgirl who has a crush that's never ending. Man, shake it off. So Jamie had to work to control his emotions. His chest was heaving. Why? And he pauses and closes his eyes, and then he fixes them on John. Because what I said of 12trees is true. With Syverly dead, he holds the finances of the rising in his hands. He must not be allowed to act. Must not. And Hal is flustered, and he springs to his feet, and he wants to know if, in fact, there is a rising. Jamie gives him some side-eye and says he knows it. And quickly he tells the plan that's trying to come to fruition about Quinn's acquisition of the Druid King's Cup, the involvement of the Irish regiments, and the Wild Hunts plan. Jamie couldn't help it. His voice shook at part of the telling. Was it rage or the enormity of what he had said? It could have been even sorrow. And it seemed that Jamie had stopped speaking, letting his head fall forward. And then he says, if I thought that there was the slightest chance of success, I should have kept my own counsel, but there is not, and I know it. I cannot let it happen again. There was desolation in Jamie's voice. Did Hal know the enormity of what Jamie had just done? He didn't think so. But Hal's face was intent, his eyes live as coals. So Hal asks for a minute, and he leaves the room. He's summoning the footmen, and he's sending them to get Harry Quarry and the other senior officers of the regiment, and he's calling for his secretary. And he sends a note to the Prime Minister as well. And then his feet are on the stairs, and Grace says he's gone to tell Minnie. Jamie sits by the hearth, his head sunk in one hand. And after a few moments, John clears his throat. Dinna speak to me, not now, Jamie says softly. Very difficult for him. And this one moment of time, he's completely off-tracking this uprising. Now, he knows it wouldn't be successful because Claire told him about the future. But could he have changed the outcome? Probably not. And perhaps he was meant to be the one interfering with the outcome all along. So they sat in silence for about half an hour. The butler came in to light candles. And then he brought in a note for John. John reads it and puts it in his waistcoat pocket, and Hal is coming back. Hal was pale when he came in. He was in command of himself, and he was excited. And he asked the butler Nasenby for claret and biscuits. Oh, claret. Apparently the English like that. Fraser had gotten back to his feet. And he looks at Jamie and says, "As you point out, Mr. Fraser, you are not an Englishman. You are, however, a paroled prisoner of war, and my responsibility. I must reluctantly forbid you to fight Twelvetrees, much as I agree that the man needs killing." "Forbid me?" And he looks at Hal with a mix of curiosity and disgust, like he'd found something on the bottom of his shoe. "You cause me to betray my friends, to betray my nation, my king, and myself. And now you suppose that you will deprive me of my honor as a man? I think not, sir." And Jamie leaves the library. He passes the butler, who feigns not noticing, and puts the food down. Now John asks if that was Minnie's advice. Hal didn't need Minnie to tell him the sort of trouble that would happen if that duel took place between Jamie and Twelvetrees. John says you could stop him. Hal snorts at this. Yeah, if he wants to lock Jamie up, because nothing else would work. And then they discuss the choice of weapon. Sword, pistol. John was thinking that Hal had killed Nathaniel Twelvetrees with a pistol, and he had accidentally killed Edwin Nichols with a pistol. But pistols were prone to misfire and not be accurate at long distances. And Hal puts in that he doesn't know how Jamie is with a sword, but he's seen the way he moves, and he's got a 6-inch reach on Twelvetrees. And John jumps in. "To the best of my knowledge, which is reasonably good, he hasn't had any sort of weapon in his hands for the last 7 or 8 years. I don't doubt his reflexes," as he remembers Jamie catching him when he fell in that dark Irish road, with the scream of frogs and toads in his ears. "But it's you who is constantly prating on at me about the necessity of practice, is it not?" Hal assures him he never prates. What is prate, you ask? To prate is to talk foolishly or tediously about something. And then they start getting into the logistics of this. If Hal lets him fight Twelvetrees and Twelvetrees kills him, that would cause a lot of trouble for John because he's the officer in charge of his parole. And John tells him back, "I should not consider damage to my reputation the worst results arising from that situation." And then he imagines Jamie bleeding to death in his arms. Well, Hal doesn't think it'd be the worst thing either. "I'd rather he wasn't killed. I like the man, stubborn and contentious as he is." I can see why Hal and Minnie are good together. And John talks about the service that Jamie has done for them and asks Hal if he has any notion what it cost Jamie to do such a thing. Hal says he does, and he brings up that oath of loyalty that the Jacobite prisoners had to swear to. And of course John remembers it. He had to administer that oath to incoming prisoners at Ardsmuir. "May I never see my wife and children, father, mother, or relations. May I be killed in battle as a coward and lie without Christian burial in a strange land, far from the graves of my forefathers and kindred. He can only thank God, he thinks, that he did not have to be the one to administer that oath to Jaime. He couldn't stand it. Hal agrees they owe Jaime, but what happens if he kills Twelvetrees? He doesn't think Jaime would stop at just the drawing of blood. And so then they have to worry about what would happen and the aftermath. So they think that Jaime would be imprisoned for life. Ugh. The options are very poor here. And then John says to Hal, "We have used him badly." And all Hal can say is it depends on how you look at the results. But he lacked conviction. So they have to admit the means here. What do? So they're going back and forth. If we can't stop him, if he's decided to fight, or not can't but won't. But it's Jaime's choice to make. And they really wonder and ponder if Jaime really wants this duel. Was that his true purpose? And then, could they be doing him a favor by preventing him fighting? No, he doesn't think so. And this is where we have the haughty English thoughts again. It's simple, Hal. Put yourself in his place and think of what you'd do. He may not be an Englishman, but his honor is equal to yours, and so is his determination. I could not pay him a greater compliment. Because of course you know that Englishmen rank the highest on the list of honorable, right? So they decide that the next day Jaime needs to be taken to get a sword. John doesn't think there's time. And now John drops a huge 12-trees bomb on Hal. He had thought about it, and he decided he would send a note himself to Edward Twelvetrees, demanding satisfaction for his insult at the club. Hal's jaw drops. And Gray reaches into his pocket and pulls out the crumpled note. Twelvetrees replied, 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, in the gardens behind Lambeth Palace, sabers. Odd. I should have thought he'd be a rapier man. So John knew all this was going to happen because he knows Jaime. He knew what Hal's response would be. He knew that they could not have Jaime fight 12-trees for various reasons that they had discussed. So he circumvented all of that and decided that he would duel 12-trees himself. Wow. Very interesting. John might be small, but he is brave. And it was pretty nasty what 12-trees did to him. Chapter 32, Duello. John was surprised that he had slept. It was dreamless, and he woke suddenly, knowing the day was coming. And at the same time, Tom Bird, his trusty valet, came in with tea tray, shaving, water, and a candle. He asked John if he'd like some breakfast. So John decides that he feels remarkably well this morning, and he chooses not to have a full breakfast because he's not going on the battlefield. This will be something that's probably pretty short, and he needs to feel light on his feet and can't have a full belly like that. So Tom lays out John's clothes and stirs up the shaving soap. And then he turns to John, determined, and tells him he's going with him. All John says, "You are?" Tom says, "Yes." He has to be there. Even if he can't be a second, somebody he knows needs to be there. John thanks Tom and says he'd be very happy to have him there. He was glad of Tom's company. And they sat in the carriage quietly together, Gray having his best cavalry saber balanced on his knees. He should have a second, though. Hal had asked Harry Quarry to meet Gray at the ground. Not just for moral support. He wants there to be a witness, just in case. Because Gray had wondered, in case of what? Some chicanery on the part of Twelvetrees? The appearance of the Archbishop of Canterbury? What might happen? And he's pretty sure that his brother had in mind someone present to memorize Gray's dying words, just in case. And now he wonders what Jamie would do when he hears about this. And now he wonders what Jamie would do if he was the recipient of some particularly florid sentiment of a personal nature, with Gray safely out of neck-breaking range. That was a grim thought. Maybe Harry would write his epitaph in verse. Could you imagine Harry Quarry writing something? And then it floods back into John's mind. Master me. Damn, he'd never found the other line to his couplet. Or did he need two lines? Me be? That rhymed. Maybe it was two lines, not one. But does it need to be a quatrain? Ugh. The carriage stops. It's a cool dawn, and it feels fresh outside. Two other carriages pull up. The grass is wet, and he thinks it'll be bad footing. He feels electricity jumping through him. And he thinks about that experience with that electric eel the year before. He stretches, easing the tightness in his chest and arm. That bloody eel led to his last duel. At least if he killed Twelvetrees, it would be on purpose. Not if, he revises. He tells Tom to come on. The last time he'd been to this location, it was for a garden party, in which he escorted his mother. Oh, mother. What would Hal say to her? He had to get that out of his mind and not think of it too much. He decides to fight in stocking feet and not barefoot. Better traction, maybe? He could see 12 trees at the far side. And he was thankful and relieved that Reginald Twelvetrees was not with his brother. But he did recognize Joseph Honey. He was a captain, and he was Twelvetrees' second. And then the surgeon appeared. Apparently, Twelvetrees planned to survive if he was wounded. Well, he would, wouldn't he? John thinks. So John is just noticing his surroundings, looking. We see the description of the sky. And then he hears footsteps behind him. He thinks it's Harry, of course, but it wasn't. His heart jumped. What the devil are you doing here? I'm your second. Ah, yes. Apparently, the Duchess, Miss Minnie, told Jamie what was going on. And he's a little bit of annoyed for Minnie not minding her own business. Jamie assures him he spoke with Colonel Quarry, and they both agreed that he should have the honor of seconding John. And Gray thinks, for an instant, whether agreed was a euphemism for knocked on the head, because he couldn't see Quarry yielding his office gracefully. He was glad that Jamie was there nonetheless. He reached in his pocket and withdrew a slip of paper. Your brother bade me give you this. Thank you. All it said was luck, H. John didn't even have to open it because he knows his brother so well. Jamie surveyed the field and Twelvetrees and his two companions. And he tells John that Twelvetrees must not live. He has to trust him on that. And John asks, if he kills me, you mean? And he says, I'm much obliged to you, Mr. Fraser. Fraser smiles back at him. It will be my pleasure to avenge you, my lord, if necessary. Call me John, please. This made Jamie speechless, and his face went blank. Put his eyes down for a moment, and he thought about it. Then he put his hand on Gray's shoulder and said something soft in Gaelic. Gray thought that he heard his own father's name. Ian McGerard? Was that him? The hand lifted, but the weight stayed on his shoulder. Jamie tells him it's a blessing for a warrior going out. The blessing of Michael of the Red Domain. And he says to John, may the grace of Michael Archangel strengthen your arm, John. And apparently, John says something obscene under his breath. Why? Why did he say something obscene? Because Dr. John Hunter was there, the body snatcher himself. Okay, so as gross as it is and terrible that doctors would have graves robbed, they had to clinically learn how bodies worked and where all the parts were, what they were all about. And people really didn't sign themselves over to science like they do now. It was pretty macabre, but totally necessary and horrible at the same time. So John puts it to Jamie that under no circumstances is Dr. Hunter to go anywhere near him if he's injured or if he's killed. He wants to be taken home. Swear you will not let him touch me. Everyone's terrified of Dr. Hunter. Jamie didn't think Dr. Hunter looked really like a ghoul. He was short, probably about 5'4", broad-shouldered and vigorous. He looks at John, envisioning Hunter tossing Gray's limp body over his shoulder and loping off with it. And John looks at him and says fiercely, swear! I swear upon my hope of heaven. And John relaxes. Good. So the second is supposed to go and talk to the other second, and they want to make sure that they both still want to go through with this duel. Jamie goes over, and though he'd never done this before, Harry Quarry had given him instruction on what he was to do. So he goes over and chats. And, of course, there's really nothing to say, but they have to formally state it. I take it Captain Twelvetrees does not intend to withdraw his assertion that Lord John is a sodomite. Oh, and Captain Honey blushes over this. I love the use of the name Honey here. It cracks me up. And he says, no, and I quite understand that your principal will not brook the insult. Certainly not. You would not expect it, would you? Oh, no. Honey looks aghast. But I did have to ask. And they talk over terms, sabers, first blood. No, death is really what they're going for here. So they decide there's nothing more to say. Except he does tell Jamie that the surgeon is there and will, of course, be at Lord John's service, should it be necessary. And at this point, Lord John is stripped to his shirt and breeches. He's barefoot on the wet grass, and he's warming his muscles and practicing. And Jamie assures Honey that he doesn't think he'll have to fight John. So back to the corners they go. So the weight of the saber feels good in John's hand. He's taking in everything around him. He's taking note of his weapon. And as Jamie returns, we see Harry Corey had joined Lord John and Tom Bird. He just couldn't stay away. And Jamie says, "You mean His Grace doesn't quite trust me to give him a complete report of the outcome, should that be necessary?" "Partly that. Mostly, damn it, he's my friend," Harry says. But John was so in his preparation, he was so absorbed in his mind, that he barely noticed Harry arriving at all. But he heard what he had said and thanked him. And John gets this sudden affection for the three men standing there. And he starts thinking of an old folk song that drifts through his mind. "God send each noble man at his end, such hawks, such hounds, and such a friend." And then he thinks, which was which? Well, Tom must be his faithful hound, and Harry, the friend, and Jamie Fraser, his hawk, untamed and ferocious, but there with him at last. If that's what it was, though in all honesty he thought not. He still doesn't really know why Jamie's there. He thinks to himself, "I can feel my heart beating, feel my breath. How can it stop?" Harry grabs his hand and Tom smiles at him. And these unspoken signals were going through the men. Wet grass feels wonderful, cold, fresh. Bastard's been up all night. His eyes are red. He does look like a ferret or a badger without his wig. Should have pulled my hair, but what the hell, too late now. I love the things that are going through John's head. These are the kind of things that go through Jamie's head. And his saber touches Twelvetrees' sword, and there's that chime of metal, and electricity ran smoothly up his back and over him. And Captain Honey says, "Go." They were both excellent swordsmen. And this was not going to be a long fight. Sabers are heavy, and he doesn't think it could last longer than 15 minutes. And as they go, they're dodging and swinging, and Gray is injured. Shit, he thinks. But he has a ringing blow to Twelvetrees' left ear. So they know nothing will end this, Captain Honey and the other men, until death. These men had it out for each other. So we see all the description of their fight. They're both getting winded. And they're clashing. John punches him in the face. John gets his saber loose and hacked viciously at the other's body with a loud grunt. Jamie winces, hearing Twelvetrees' hoarse cry, feeling that blow go home. He had a curving scar across his own ribs inflicted by an English saber at Prestonpans. Gray presses his advantage as Twelvetrees staggered back. However, John was unprotected. The watchers gasped, and his shirt begins to redden. So they're both pretty injured now. And John is saying expletives in his head. Fuck, fuck. And Tom implores him to get up. Get up, please get up. He's got to ask him to yield. That's not going to happen. Gray put a trap in for Twelvetrees, and as he got closer, he rose his saber, and he drove it home hard into his belly. They heard an inhuman noise, but Jamie wasn't sure which one made it. At this, Gray lets go of his sword and sits down on the grass, looking surprised. He smiles vaguely at Tom, and then his eyes rolled up into his head and he fell backwards, welling blood. Oh, Jesus. Twelvetrees was still standing, hands closed around the blade in his belly. Dr. Hunter and Captain Honey ran across the grass to reach him. And Jamie wonders if Twelvetrees had given Captain Honey instructions. And all John would say when he got near was, "Take me home." So John is still alive. Twelvetrees is only going to stand for a moment. He has a mortal wound, especially once that saber gets pulled out. But John is seriously injured. He has a chest wound, a leg wound. He's lost quite a bit of blood. I can't imagine seeing somebody duel in person, what that would feel like, what the presence would be, what the air would sound like. It would be very heavy, I assume. I like that John had his trio around him. I would want Jamie to second me if I had to go do something like that. Of course, I don't even know if I've ever held a sword in my life and probably couldn't even lift a saber. Not very well. But we're getting to the meat of this book. We still don't know exactly what Twelvetrees' involvement was. We're going on assumption and circumstantial evidence, right? We still don't have a clear idea of what his role was. Not exactly. So what did we learn these chapters? We learned what a great cost it was to Jamie. What he was willing to do, and he is betraying those people. We learned that John, man, that guy has courage. He's upstanding, and he was willing to fight Twelvetrees for that slur against him publicly. That's a big deal. And we get a little more insight on Hal and what his motivations are. He's a crown man. He's a soldier. But he also is able to recognize what Jamie has done for them and what that burden is, and that they owe him something. So where can you find A Dram of Outlander? Well, adramofOutlander.com. And on Facebook, it's A Dram of Outlander page. You have to ask to join the A Dram of Outlander group, because that's for listeners only. On Twitter and Instagram, it is just Dram of Outlander. And if you would like to send me an email, it's contact@adramofOutlander.com, or you can always leave a voicemail message at the listener line at 719-425-9444. Questions, comments, pretty much anything you want. Just speak clearly so that I can understand what you have to say. And how can you support the podcast? Well, the number one way you can support A Dram of Outlander is to be on the social media pages, follow the website, share the posts, share the podcasts, engage with other listeners and fans. Because I don't just post things that I write, I post things that are relevant to Outlander or something that's Scottish or fits the theme altogether of what we all love and adore here. The next way that you can support the podcast, of course, is financially. You can contact me if you want to make a one-time offering, or you can go to patreon.com/A Dram of Outlander and do a small monthly offering or the offering of your size. And recently I was looking at the geographical demographics of who listens to the podcast. And it's pretty exciting that though the United States has the majority, that Canada and Australia are growing populations of listeners. So thank you, and welcome. I hope you enjoy the show and my accent isn't too difficult to understand. I appreciate you as always, and thank you for listening. And until next time, slán je va.